from the vaginal washes?
Yes, I was.
And did that match either of the reference samples that you had?
It matches the DNA profile from Nicole Pietz.
I next want to ask you about item ME10.
Okay.
Did you receive that item, and what was it?
I did, and ME10 is described as right-hand fingernail clippings from Nicole Pietz.
And I'm going to show you a photograph. Is this the packaging for that item?
Yes, it is.
And I'm going to show you another photograph. Is that the item itself?
That is a microscopic view of the fingernail clippings, yes.
And it looks like, what is your understanding of what the fingernail clippings are?
Though, in this case, those were samples removed to autopsy of the fingernail protrusions, the fingernail clippings, the tips of the fingernails.
And what process do you follow in examining fingernail clippings, or what did you do here?
The goal of examining fingernail clippings is to determine if there's DNA under them other than that belonging to the person from which they were taken. That is Nicole Pietz. So we're examining for foreign DNA, and that was the process that was undertaken.
In the case of fingernail clippings, obviously because they're coming from the individual that they were clipped from, is it easy for that individual's DNA, in this case Ms. Pietz's, to overwhelm the possibility of any foreign DNA?
That's an expectation, is that if there is foreign DNA, depending on the amount of owner DNA, if you will, the DNA that owns the fingernails, the possibility is, depending on the amount of tissue that's also collected with the clipping, or it's just underneath. When you scratch your own face and you scratch your arm, you're depositing your own DNA under your fingernail clippings, and so potentially you can overwhelm other DNA traces.
And so it sounds like, does that depend on how much of your own DNA you might put under there inadvertently?
Yeah, it depends on, when was the last time you washed your hands, how often do you scratch your face, how easily do you release DNA from your face or your hands, or just general living.
With fingernail clippings, do you follow the same process for getting a profile? I mean, do you use chemicals with the actual nails to try to get the DNA off of it?
What we do is we wash or submerge the clippings in a solution to try to loosen any foreign cells from beneath the clippings.
And in this case, were you able to determine whether there was any DNA present?
DNA was detected, excuse me.
And were you able to get any type of DNA profile that you could compare to any reference samples?
I was not able to get a DNA profile from that sample.
So even though you detected DNA, it couldn't be compared to anybody else?
Correct.
Do you have any way of knowing then whether it was consistent with Nicole Pietz herself?
No, I do not.
Not enough to do anything with?
Excuse me, based on the quantitation method that I used, there was enough to do something with, but no DNA profile was obtained. The quantitation method used at the time doesn't distinguish between, and I use this loosely, bad DNA and good DNA. Bad DNA being degraded DNA. So all I know is DNA is present. If the DNA is too degraded, I'm not able to analyze it, and that might be this explanation.
I want to talk next about item ME11. What was that?
ME11, excuse me, is the left-hand fingernail clippings from Nicole Pietz.
And I'm going to show you a photograph up here first. It's labeled C. Was that the packaging that you received those in?
Yes, it was.
And photograph D, is that the actual clippings for the left hand?
Yes, it is.
Were you able to get any type of DNA profile from the left-hand fingernail clippings?
Yes, I was.
And did that match either of the reference samples that you had?
It's a DNA profile, excuse me, that matches Nicole Pietz's DNA profile.
Next, I want to ask, did you receive item ME12?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
Those are pubic hairs from Nicole Pietz.
Did you examine those to see if there was the presence of sperm or indication of semen?
Yes, I did.
And was there either of those?
No, I did not detect either of the spermatozoa, and I did not detect P30.
And did you look at that for DNA or take it forward for DNA analysis?
Excuse me, it was stopped. No DNA analysis was attempted.
I next want to ask you about item AAM11 and ask if you received that.
Yes, I did.
And what was that item?
11 is described as a swab from the right shoulder of Nicole Pietz.
And so were you able to detect any DNA on that swab?
Yes, DNA was detected.
Were you able to go forward and get any type of a profile?
I was not. No DNA profile was obtained from that sample.
So does that mean you were unable to compare it to any of the reference samples then?
That is correct.
I would next ask you to look at item AAM12.
Okay.
And what was that item?
Number 12 is described as swab next to left hand on right side of Nicole Pietz.
And did you examine that item?
I did.
And was there DNA detected on that item?
Yes, there was.
Were you able to obtain any type of DNA profile that could be compared to anybody?
I was not able to.
Next, I would ask you if you examined item AAM13.
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
It's described as a swab of the left bicep. Again, Nicole Pietz.
And what result, if any, did you obtain from that item?
DNA was detected, but no DNA profile was obtained.
So does that mean you were unable to compare to anybody on that one as well?
Correct.
And next, I would like to ask if you examined item AAM24.
Yes.
And what was that?
That's described as a swab from the left thigh of Nicole Pietz.
And what results, if any, did you obtain from that item?
On this item, no DNA was detected and no DNA profile was obtained.
Mr. Curry, I next want to ask you about an item labeled, or items labeled AAM88. Did you receive that item or items?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe what those were?
Those were 12 swab boxes that were collected from a vehicle.
And when you say swab boxes, does that mean that there were 12 swabs and they were all packaged separately?
Correct. Each swab each swab box contained one swab, each swab being collected from a different part of a vehicle.
And was each swab box labeled as to where in the vehicle that swab had been taken from?
Yes, they were.
Did you assign your own numbers or letters to those 12 swabs?
Yes. For convenience, I gave each one A through L was my designation.
I want to walk through those one at a time, and I want to first direct you to the one you labeled AAM88H and ask you what that swab was, where that swab was from.
That's described as a swab of a gear shift.
And were you able to obtain any type of DNA profile from that swab?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to match that to any of the reference samples you had received?
I was able to. It's a partial male profile, so if you recall, that means I didn't get results at each test location. In this case, there are 8 test locations that came back with a result. One did not. And this partial male profile matches the DNA profile of David Pietz.
And when you say that you had it at 8 locations, was that 8 out of 9 possible that you could get it at?
Yes, that's correct.
And on the 9th location, was there DNA that you could determine whether it was consistent with Mr. Pietz, even if it wasn't high enough to calculate in the statistics?
There is, if you recall, there's a threshold that we set above which DNA must be detected. There is DNA detected below the threshold, and it appears, I can't tell from the results, pardon me, I'm not able to determine to whom, in this one location, who it might match based on the results.
And it's below the threshold level?
It is below the threshold. It is below the threshold.
For
Yes.
this DNA, the result that you got for the gear shift, was there evidence of just a single source, Mr. Pietz?
Correct. For the gear shift, it's a single source male partial profile.
I want to next direct your attention to...
Excuse me. The witness is referring to a page of his report, which I can't find.
What page are you on?
I am on page 113 of 123.
Mr. Curry, I want to direct your attention next to AAM 88.
Hold on just a second.
Yes, if we could just take a second. May I just check to make sure I'm on the same page as the
Yes.
witness? Mr. Curry, I'm going to show you a page here that seems to say 113 of 123. Is that the same page you just referred to?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Curry, I next want to ask you about the item you labeled AAM 88J.
Yes.
And what was that swab? Where was that swab from?
That's described as from the underside of a gear shift handle.
And were you able to get a DNA profile from that?
Yes, I was.
And did that match either of the reference samples that you got in this case?
Yes. This DNA profile is a mixed DNA profile. That is, there's more than one person contributing DNA. There's a major contributor. That is, there's one person that's contributing more DNA than the other sources of DNA. And the major contributor is a male profile that matches the DNA profile of David Pietz.
And was that at all 9 locations in this case?
Yes, it was.
And you indicated there was a mixture. Was there some additional DNA present as well?
Yes, there's one of the test locations, there is an additional amount of detected DNA.
And was that consistent with the reference sample from Nicole Pietz at that location?
She does have that she does have that information, yes,
She has that same information at that location.
correct.
I want to next ask you about item AAM 88D.
Yes.
What was that swab?
This is described as a passenger front door pull interior.
And what results were you able to obtain from that swab, if any?
This is a partial DNA profile. There were results at 6 test locations out of 9. It's a partial profile that matches the DNA profile of Nicole Pietz.
Next, Mr. Curry, I would direct attention to AAM 88K.
Yes.
And what was that swab?
This is described as the steering wheel.
And what were the results on that item?
This is a mixed DNA profile. Again, more than one source of DNA. It's consistent with originating from 2 people. Both Nicole Pietz and David Pietz are possible sources of the DNA in this sample.
And do they account for the DNA at all the locations in this sample?
Yes, they do.
Are you able to tell in this mixed sample, Mr. Curry, from the amount of DNA detected, whether David Pietz or Nicole Pietz contributed more DNA to that?
For this sample, I targeted what we typically target in a forensic DNA analysis. And based on that and the results, one person, the male profile is the major contributor in this sample over the female source.
So that would be David Pietz rather than Nicole Pietz.
If they are the sources of that DNA, I can tell you that if there are 2 people in this sample, one male and one female, the male source is the major contributor.
I next want to actually turn to AAM 88L.
Yes?
And what is that swab?
That's described as inside steering wheel on stitching.
And what were your results for this swab?
This swab, again, is a mixed DNA profile. Again, more than one source. Consistent with originating from 2 contributors. And both Nicole Pietz and David Pietz are included as possible sources of this DNA profile.
And do they account for all of the DNA in this sample as well?
They do.
Next, I would ask you to turn to AAM 88F.
Yes.
What was that swab?
That's described as a windshield wiper control knob.
And what were your results, if any, on this one, Mr. Curry?
This is a mixed DNA profile, consistent with originating from 2 contributors. Both Nicole Pietz and David Pietz are included as possible sources of this DNA profile.
And do they account for the DNA at all the locations in this sample?
Yes.
Next, I would ask you to turn to AAM 88E and tell me what that swab was, if you would.
That's described as passenger rear interior door pull.
And what were your results, if any, on 88E?
This DNA profile is a mixed DNA profile, 2 contributors. I cannot exclude Nicole Pietz from this DNA profile, or as a source of some of the DNA in this profile. David Pietz cannot be excluded also as a contributor. Oh, pardon me, my mistake. David Pietz is excluded as a contributor to this profile.
Are you certain that that's correct?
Just reading my... Oh, pardon me, yes, my mistake. David Pietz cannot be excluded as a contributor to this profile. There is, however, an additional source of DNA in this profile.
So let me just make sure that we're clear. Can Nicole Pietz be excluded?
No, she cannot.
And can David Pietz be excluded?
No, he cannot.
But do they account for all of the DNA?
They do not.
Okay. So when there are at least 2 individuals and they don't account for all of it, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Could I have the page you're looking at, please?
This is page 116A of 123.
116?
116A.
And Mr. Curry, is that, again, the passenger rear door pull?
Yes, it is.
So the fact that there's something additional beyond the possibility that David and Nicole Pietz can't be excluded means that it's possible somebody else's DNA is in that inside rear door pull. Is that correct? Is that essentially what it means? There could be a third person? Or is that misstating it?
It's a mixed DNA profile consistent with originating from 2 people. All I can say, at least 2 people, both David Pietz and Nicole Pietz do account for some of this DNA, but they don't account for all of the DNA. So I'm not saying that Nicole Pietz and David Pietz are in this DNA profile. I'm saying that if they account for some of the DNA, they may not be, but there is DNA in here that neither of them account for.
Okay. Next, I'm going to have you turn to, excuse me, AAM88G.
Yes.
And what was that item?
That's described as a passenger side rear exterior door handle.
And why don't you explain what your results were on this?
This is also a mixed DNA profile consistent with at least 2 contributors or originating from at least 2 people. Nicole Pietz is included as a possible contributor to this mixture. David Pietz is excluded as a contributor to this mixture. There is another source of DNA in this profile that I was able to analyze.
Who is the source of the full profile?
The other source of DNA that I was able to determine belongs to a latent print examiner who likely responded or helped collect some samples.
What was his name?
Mike French.
Now, is the DNA profiles of individuals like Mr. French who respond to crimes, are they in a system so that you can check if you do get an unknown profile to make sure it's not one of the responders?
Yes.
So was Mr. French, in this case, the major contributor to this sample?
Yes, he is.
Next, Mr. Curry, AAM88A, what was that swab?
That is a finger pattern, or is described as a finger pattern on the rear edge, rear passenger side door.
Were you able to obtain any DNA from that sample?
No DNA was detected in that sample.
How about AAM88B? What was that sample?
What was the number or letter?
88B, as in boy.
B is described as the front driver's side interior door pull handle.
And were you able to obtain any DNA from that sample?
No DNA was obtained from that sample.
And next, AAM 88C, what was that?
That is described as passenger side front exterior door handle.
Were you able to obtain any DNA results from that?
No DNA was detected in that sample.
And next, AAM 88I, what was that?
I is described as the exterior driver's side door handle.
And were you able to obtain any results on that?
No DNA was obtained from that sample.
Mr. Curry, I next want to ask you about an item labeled JJA1. Did you receive that for examination?
I did.
And what was that item?
It is a Percocet bottle.
And what was done with that item?
The bottle was examined, and a swabbing was taken of the edge and the sides of the cap.
And Mr. Curry, I'm going to show you what's been admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 46 in this case. Can you just take a moment to look at this and tell me if this appears to be the item that you examined and are talking about now?
Yes, this, and I should point out that I didn't do the hands-on examination. I performed the DNA analysis, but looking at the photographs is the item.
And tell me again, if you would, I'm going to take this out, what portion was swabbed for you to do your DNA analysis on this item?
Excuse me, the edge and the sides of the cap.
So this cap here?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So the top side of the cap was swabbed, and the grooved edges on the sides of the cap.
And were you able to obtain any DNA or DNA profile from the swabbing that was done from this cap?
Yes.
And I guess I should first ask, did you described two types of, or areas of swabbing. Was that all on one swab, or was that more than one swab?
That was all on one swab.
And what results did you get for the Percocet cap?
This is a female DNA profile that matches the DNA profile of Nicole Pietz.
And was that the only area of that item that was swabbed, is the cap?
Correct.
I next would like to ask you about item ME14. Did you receive that item?
Yes.
And what was that item?
ME14 is a retainer.
And is that again something that likely came from the medical examiner?
From the item numbering, I would say yes.
Showing you a photograph that's labeled E. Is that a photograph you took of this item?
That's a yes, it's a photograph that was taken by the technologist to examine the item.
I'm going to show you, actually I better get this marked first.
State's Exhibit 98.
Is Exhibit 98 the same photograph that's displayed on the screen right now?
Yes, it is.
I would offer Exhibit 98.
No objection.
Mr. Curry, what area was swabbed for DNA from this item?
On this item, the exterior and the edges of the retainer were swabbed. So the exterior surface and the edges that would come into contact with the gums were swabbed.
Okay, and exterior surface would be what surface, in your understanding?
The surface that's not in contact with the teeth.
Okay, the part that would face outward from the mouth, presumably?
Correct.
And those two areas that were swabbed, were those part of one swabbing?
Yes, they were.
And what DNA results, if any, did you get from this item?
This is a female DNA profile that matches the DNA profile of Nicole Pietz.
Next, I want to ask you about item ME15.
Yes.
And what was that item?
ME15 is a necklace with a cross.
And I'm showing you, Mr. Curry, on the screen, a picture that says ME15. Is that the item that you examined?
Correct.
And what areas of the item were swabbed in this case?
The entire length of the necklace and the surface of the cross.
State's Exhibit 99.
Mr. Curry, is Exhibit 99 the same photograph that's on the screen?
Yes, it is.
I would offer 99.
No objection.
Omitted.
What results did you obtain, if any, from this item, Mr. Curry?
No DNA profile was obtained from ME15.
No DNA. Okay.
Correct.
Mr. Curry, I next want to ask you about a few other items you received. Did you also receive some other wrapping trash type items that you got that were labeled in this case?
Yes, I did.
And I guess specifically I want to ask first about an item labeled AAM2. Is that something you received?
Yes.
And what was that item?
AAM2 is a candy wrapper.
And did you take photographs of that?
Photographs were taken, yes.
And did those items come from a crime scene location in this case?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, just do them separately, sorry.
State's Exhibits 100 through 107.
Thank you. Mr. Curry, I'm first going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 100. Okay. Is this the item you described as candy wrapper that you examined in this case?
Yes, it is.
I would offer Exhibit 100, Your Honor.
Your Honor, can I have a word here? Mr. Curry, you weren't the person at the scene or wherever that located this item, were you?
No, I was not.
This is something that was sent to you, packaged up?
Correct.
Okay. Your Honor, with that, I don't think there's a foundation to bring this in. I don't think it's been, unless I'm missing something, I don't recall it being introduced by one of the detectives at the scene.
Well, counsel, he can preliminarily testify to it. If there's no foundation now or later, it will not go back to the jury room. At this point, testing my memory, I can't remember if there was a witness who testified to collecting these various items or not.
Okay. And I would ask...
If I may, Detective Decker and Detective Anderson both talked about collecting these type of items at the scene of the location. I don't know that they specifically said exactly what they all were, but these are items that were submitted.
They will be conditionally admitted if they need to call the detectives back to identify the photos as items they specifically collected. We can do it that way.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Is that all right, Mr. Allen?
It is, Your Honor.
Okay.
So may I, is Exhibit 100 admitted, Your Honor?
Yeah, well, it's conditionally admitted. I'm making sure we have the appropriate foundation that it was actually found. I presume they said they found it in which scene?
It was at the testimony from Detective Decker was they collected items such as this at the scene of the body recovery.
All right, well,
May I publish?
yeah, you're going to probably need to bring him back to say that they in fact found that item and put it into evidence.
And did you get any results on this item, the candy wrapper, Mr. Curry?
A trace amount of DNA was detected on that particular item.
And were you able to compare that to any of the reference samples that you received?
No, I was not.
And did you look at or receive items AAM3 and AAM6?
Yes, I did.
And what were those items?
AM3 is AM3 is a beer can. Excuse me, is a beer can.
And what was item AAM6?
Pardon me. AAM6 is also a beer can.
And first, Mr. Curry, I'm going to show you exhibits 101 and 102. Do you recognize these are photographs you took of AAM3?
Those, correct, those are from, pardon me, AAM3.
Thank you. I would offer exhibits 101 and 102.
Similarly,
Thank you, Your Honor.
I assume that's going to be the same on all of these items, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor.
The detective may testify later that those specific items are found at the scene.
If we need to do that, yes, Your Honor. I'm going to show you exhibits 106 and 107 and ask if these are photographs of the other beer can, AAM6, Mr. Curry.
Yes, that is AAM6.
I would offer AAM exhibits 106 and 107. The same ruling, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And Mr. Curry, on these items, which were the beer can items, were there certain areas that were swabbed in an attempt to get DNA?
On AAM3, a swab was used to swab the side of the can and the lip of the can near the opening, and also the top of the can around the opening, all in one swab.
What are you attempting to get when you do swabbings in those areas of something such as a can?
You're trying to get a DNA profile from someone who might have drunk from this item.
And for AAM3, were you able to obtain any DNA profile?
No DNA profile was obtained from that item.
And how about for AAM6? Was it the same areas that were swabbed on this item?
Yes, down the side of the can near the opening and the lip of the can and the top of the can around the opening. Those were swabbed on one swab.
And were you able to obtain any type of DNA profile on these items?
No DNA profile was obtained from AAM6.
Next, I want to ask you, Mr. Curry, about AAM4. Is that an item that you received also?
Yes, it is.
And what was that item?
It's described as a Kraft Easy Cheese can.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 103. Is this a photograph you took of that item?
That's a photograph that was taken of that item, correct?
With the same ruling, Your Honor, I would offer Exhibit 103.
Same.
And what was swabbed in this item, Mr. Curry?
The outside and inside of the tip were swabbed, all in one swab.
And was there any DNA results obtained from this item?
No DNA typing, no DNA profile was obtained.
And lastly, I want to ask you about item AAM 5. What was that item?
Five is a cigarette package.
And I'm showing you State's Exhibits 104 and 105. Are these photographs of the cigarette package that you examined?
Yes.
The same ruling, Your Honor, I would offer 104 and 105. And Mr. Curry, was there a particular area that was swabbed on this item?
Yes, on the top of the packaging, the exterior seams were swabbed where you might come in contact if you're flipping the package open.
And were you able to obtain any DNA results on this item?
No DNA profile was obtained from AAM5.
Mr. Curry, you talked about this a little bit in the beginning of your testimony. Is it possible when you get a match or profile that matches a reference sample to assign numbers to it, statistics, to indicate how likely it is to find that profile again with someone else in the population?
It's possible to generate what we call a random match probability, yes.
And are those numbers that sometimes the crime lab, in this case the Washington Crime Lab when you're working there, might generate if you obtain matches or things that are partial matches?
Yes.
Did you do any of that statistical work with the stuff that you've testified to today?
I did not.
I don't have any other questions for you right now. Thank you, Mr. Curry.
Ross?
Thank you. Mr. Curry, my name is David Allen. We met outside today. Yes?
Yes.
I'd like to ask some preliminary questions about DNA just to follow up. First, you use two different terms. One is DNA and one is DNA profile. Could you tell the jury again and explain the difference between those two terms as you use them?
Yes. We all have, DNA is a collective terminology for the DNA that's contained within us. We all contain DNA. So when I say DNA is detected, I detected DNA. The forensic DNA analysis, or any DNA analysis, attempts to develop a DNA profile. And a DNA profile, if you recall, many of these samples I tested 9 different locations in that variable region. The DNA profile is an expression of the results at each one of those locations. So a DNA profile is a way to tell you, or any reader of this report, what the results were at each test location.
Okay. Now, I think you also told us that there are certain variables which cause DNA to be perhaps distributed or laid down more likely than not. Is that right? And I'm not phrasing this very perfectly, but you talked about that, didn't you?
I did, yes.
And one of those factors is some people slough or lay down more DNA than other people.
That's correct.
And that's just a normal function of their body, the differences that we all have.
Correct.
Could it be compared to perhaps some of us sweat more than others?
That would be a reasonable analogy. It varies from person to person.
Okay. And you talked about different ways that DNA can be distributed or laid down. One way, I believe, and I have it in my notes, the exact term you used, but it was like from fluids, right? Like from blood or saliva or some other bodily fluid, right?
Correct.
And you called that, was it fluid DNA?
I'm not sure what I called it, but that's a fair term. And any DNA from a body fluid, correct.
Okay. Another terminology I think you used was touch DNA, right?
Correct.
And that's if we touch something, touch a surface.
Correct.
And is the DNA that typically gets distributed or laid down in that sort of situation is the skin cells?
That's the expectation. Barring any cut on your hand, if we're talking about the hand, the expectation is that you're not secreting body fluid. The only source of DNA is your skin cells.
Okay. And touch DNA is oftentimes a very useful DNA that you as a forensic scientist will come across, right?
When you say useful,
Well, I mean, it's not uncommon for you to find touch DNA.
it's not uncommon, correct?
And by that I mean typically most people do put down skin cells when they touch things. Or at least there's the possibility.
There's the possibility, yes.
And is that sometimes called sloughing skin cells?
That's the terminology, pardon me, that we use, that some people more readily slough or release skin cells.
Okay. Can skin cells, sorry, I had a little trouble with that word. Can skin cells be sloughed by just rubbing one's hands together and sloughed on the table or whatever's below it?
So you're rubbing your hands essentially like a powder,
Yeah.
is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I guess it would depend on how vigorous you were rubbing, when the last time was you washed your hands. So can I rule out the possibility that you would release cells that way? No.
But the more usual way, or at least more predictable way, is if somebody touches something, like if I put my hand on this podium here.
That's the expectation, is that when you touch something, there's a probability you will leave a trace of yourself behind.
Okay. And in terms of our skin, the outer layer of our skin, is that known as the epidermis,
Yes,
or the epidermal layer?
correct.
And is that layer actually alive?
It is not. It's a layer of dead cells.
Okay. So I take it from that the skin cells that are sloughed, they're no longer alive, right?
Correct. Those cells are, as your skin is formed, cells are pushed upwards. The top layer of your skin is dead cells. And generally those cells don't have detectable amounts of DNA or any DNA.
And I guess this helps explain why scientists, or at least we hear of scientists, finding these bones of ancient animals and still being able to extract DNA from them.
When you say this explains,
Well, I mean the idea that the skin cells or the DNA that's left, if you're sloughing skin cells, isn't alive. So therefore, if you find the bone of an ancient animal, there may be DNA, though nothing's alive.
well, correct. Those samples, an archaeological sample, the cells are dead. However, if the sample is preserved appropriately, if it's dried, it's in a cool environment, it's possible to harvest DNA from those cell types, even though they're dead. The distinction is with the epidermal layer, or the squamous layer, SQUAMOUS layer, is that these cells generally don't have nuclei, and that's where we find the DNA that's living. So that's the distinction between the two dead types of cells.
Okay. By the same token, if we have a person that's deceased and DNA is their body swab for DNA, the fact that they're deceased doesn't preclude taking DNA and making a DNA profile from those swabs, right?
Correct.
Because in fact, I mean, obviously there's a huge difference. I don't mean to diminish that, but at least in terms of the skin, the epidermal layer is dead whether the person's alive or whether they've passed away.
The top surface is alive, correct. So the swabbing technique is important because you don't...
The top surface is
The,
alive.
pardon me, the top surface is dead, you're correct. So the swabbing technique is important because if you just collect this top layer, there's a probability that you're not going to collect any cells that contain nuclei or DNA.
Okay, well, I guess I'm missing that because I believe you already said that if we touch something, we can leave skin cells, and those are dead, right?
The skin cells, the skin cells are left behind. You have a mixed population, so you're going to have, and this is where it comes into, how rigid or how much friction is there between the two surfaces, between yourself and the object. So they're going to coax more than just that top surface that doesn't have nuclei. They're going to coax cells that are down below to be left behind cells that do contain nuclei. So those are the factors, or that's the rationale why sometimes with a touch profile you're not going to detect DNA, and sometimes you are. It depends on the duration of the touch and the surface that you're touching.
Well, okay, let me then go back to a body that's deceased. When the body is swabbed, does the technician attempt to get some of the cells that have nuclei?
I don't think there's a conscious effort because they can't visualize that, but the swabbing technique is such that it's of a duration and of an intensity that you collect a suitable sample of cells. So you're not, when we're talking about the top layer, we're talking about a very thin layer of cells, not the entire epidermal surface. And so when you swab, you're obviously going to collect some of the cells that don't contain DNA, and you'll collect cells that do have DNA.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification on that. And that's with a body that's deceased we're talking about. You could still collect cells, obviously, with nuclei, right?
From any body.
From any body, whether alive or dead.
Correct.
Okay. And then that compares with the ancient animal fossils. There can still be nuclei eons, generations, millennium after the animal dies, right?
It's possible to collect that type of sample, yes.
Okay. Well, in this case, Nicole Pietz's body was swabbed at the lab. I'm sorry, at the medical examiner's office, presumably, right?
Presumably, yes.
You didn't swab it.
I did not.
You, as a forensic scientist or biologist, have to rely upon the skill of are they the CSI people or the technicians who get the bodily samples, right?
Whomever the pathologist or the autopsy lab employs. So technicians, yes, I depend on that.
And you working in the crime lab system, you presume that the people that do that type of work are trained and competent, right?
Yes.
Do you know some of them? I mean, do you meet? Do you talk about it?
No.
Okay. So that's a different division or department than you're involved in?
It's physically a different location in the city, yes.
Okay. And certainly, I know you're well trained, going through training and so forth. You've had some, I suspect, even though you don't collect the samples yourself, you've had some training on how it's supposed to be done.
Correct, with respect to swabbing for evidence, yes.
Okay. So from what I heard here, there was swabbing done on Miss Pietz's body after it was located, yes?
Correct.
And you could probably find this faster than I can in my notes, but you were given how many body swabs? And I'm
asking about swabs on the exterior of the body.
exterior body,
Okay.
and maybe I have it here. I have a report, this is dated, it's a crime lab report dated June 5, 2006, I believe.
Correct, yes.
And I'm looking at AAM 11, 12, 13, 14. Those are all body swabs from Ms. Pietz, right?
Yes, they are.
And I think you already told us one was from the right shoulder, yes?
Excuse me, yes.
One was next to left hand on right side.
Correct.
One was the left bicep,
Yes,
and one was the left thigh.
that's correct.
And out of those, again, I'm going to have to find my notes, but maybe you could tell me. DNA was found on some of those?
So, excuse me, for AAM11,
Okay, that's the one where DNA is present, but you weren't able to make a profile.
correct.
And that's the left-hand fingernail clippings, is that right?
Oh,
I'm
yes,
sorry,
pardon me.
that's the right shoulder.
Right shoulder.
Okay, so this is very unusual, isn't it?
It goes to the quantitation method that was used at the time. This system that was used at the time detects DNA. It tells you if you have DNA present in your sample. It doesn't tell you if you have amplifiable DNA. So it just tells you there's DNA present. If you recall, I loosely used the terms good DNA and bad DNA. It doesn't distinguish between DNA that you can work with and DNA that's too degraded to proceed any further with.
Well, one should be able to get DNA from a body that was perhaps out at the scene a week or 9 days in fairly cool weather. One should be able to, is the word harvested, is that the word that we use?
Well, and DNA was obtained.
And well, and thank you for correcting me, but wouldn't you expect that one could get DNA that could then be turned into a profile if you're doing it under laboratory conditions that apparently this was?
Correct. So once the evidence is received, it is done under laboratory conditions. The body, however, the moment the individual is deceased, decay begins. And so that's a possible explanation as to why we're detecting DNA, but because of decay, or degradation, or any environmental factor, we're detecting degraded DNA and not DNA that's suitable for analysis.
Well, now we have, let me ask you about number 12, AAM number 12. That's next to left hand on the right side, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
DNA detected but no profile.
Correct.
AAM 13, left bicep. DNA detected,
Yes,
no profile.
also correct.
AMA 24, left thigh, no DNA.
No DNA was detected, correct.
So in that one, it wasn't a profile. You didn't even, the person that took the sample didn't even get any DNA. Is that correct?
Well, no DNA was on the swab, correct.
Okay.
No DNA was detected on the swab.
So even though when we get a profile and you can make some sort of match and there's a great probability that it belongs to a certain person, and DNA in that circumstance might be very accurate, in terms of actually getting the DNA, harvesting it, that's sometimes a hit or miss proposition, isn't it?
When you're talking about a situation where there's a possibility of degradation, you don't know the extent of the degradation of the sample. So that makes it difficult to predict from the quantitation results whether you'll have enough DNA to analyze or sufficient DNA to analyze.
Well, didn't you tell us during your interview by Mr. Offenbecker a couple weeks ago that you were surprised that no DNA profiles could be made or could be achieved from the swabbings from Miss Pietz's body?
That is correct. And I do have to say, this was a teleconference conducted in Toronto. I didn't have the case history. I had the file there. So I didn't take the time to investigate how the body was found. So I didn't have that information with me. I didn't know the time duration that we were talking about from the potential time of death to the moment the samples were collected. That was information that, because of the time and because of my distance, I wasn't able to readily access.
Well, you were provided with your reports, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Could we take a break now?
Are you going to finish?
Oh, not even close.
All right, we'll have our lunch recess.
Try to get out of here.